Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of At the Table. My name is Jackie King, and I am always so excited that you are joining me for another conversation of women in leadership. And today I get to introduce you to my sweet friend, Christine Hoover. Christine, welcome to the table and the conversation.
Thanks, Jackie, for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
I was trying to think of pointing back to when the first time was that we connected, and I do not remember at all. And I was trying to look through emails, all the things, but it's been several years now. And obviously just being able to kind of follow one another and encourage one another. And today's topic is going to be all about pastors' wives and ministers' wives. And I know this is a needed conversation. We're both pastors' wives. We've both kind of been in the trenches. And so I'm really looking forward to just the candid and raw conversation that comes with this influence and sometimes the crazy that comes along with being in the role that we are. So why don't you tell us a little bit about you? Where are you recording from? Some of the personal things just to get to know you.
Well, I'm Christine. I'm married to Kyle. We've been married for 22 years and we have 3 boys who are 19, 17, and 14. My oldest is in college, so we have 2 at home. We recently made a move. We were
where'd you move to?
We moved to Austin, Texas, which I know you are a big Longhorn fan.
I don't think you are though, right?
I'm an Aggie, so okay. I am living in a new territory. Yeah. But it's a great place to be. We're back in Texas after serving in Charlottesville, Virginia for 14 years. My husband and I planted a church there and he pastored that church for those 14 years. So we're back where we are. We're not from Austin, but we're back in Texas where we both grew up. So it's been a fun transition. We're still in transition a few months in, but we're really enjoying it.
So you finally decided to take up the cause of trying to share the gospel with the Longhorns. This is how you're going to live your life well and leverage yourself to the gospel.
I will admit, Jackie, that I am paying more attention to Longhorn football.
Oh, okay.
I at least pay attention to see what the score is. And there are a lot of people around me who care. And so to care for them, I am caring a little bit. But yeah, I don't think I mentioned, but my husband, Kyle, is serving at the Austin Stone Community Church as an executive pastor. So it's been a transition in his role as well. He went from being a lead pastor to an executive pastor, which at Austin Stone they do. It's more of a pastoral role than it sounds as an executive pastor. So he's getting to do all the things that he really loved about being a lead pastor without some of the things that were a little bit, not necessarily in his wheelhouse. So it's fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So here's a question. Do you have anything burnt orange?
No.
The delay.
Well, I'll tell you what we do have is burnt orange, but I think burnt orange is the worst color. I do not know why you would ever choose to have your colors be burnt orange. But we do have, my husband's father passed away a few years ago and he owned a 1981 Jeep and it's burnt orange.
Oh, that's amazing.
We got it. And my husband grew up, as a kid riding around in it. So it's so fun for him and for our kids, but it is burnt orange.
All right. Well, I'm just waiting for you to drive by the stadium with your horns up. It's going to happen one day.
No, never.
Okay. So you kind of shared a little bit about his roles, but you're also a leader in and of yourself. So I want you to tell everyone just a little bit about just how God has used your gifts. I don't want to give it all away. So why don't you tell us a little bit about, in your own right, the leader that you are?
Well, why is that hard for us to accept that? What you just said, I'm like, I think I am.
You are.
It's hard. It's hard to, for some reason, accept that as a woman, but definitely what he's really given me to do in the last decade or so is to write and to teach the Bible. And I've written several books and I'm working on one right now, a Bible study. I have a podcast for ministry wives called Ministry Wives Podcast, and get to speak at different women's conferences and things like that. I'm considering and pursuing an opportunity at our church, our new church, to come on staff alongside my husband. So that's not a
thing about that. Yeah.
That's not a definite thing yet, but I'm talking with people about that. That's actually been in my heart for the past few years, just a desire to do more in the local church, to serve with my husband in a more official way. And so that's coming to fruition, I hope.
Yeah, I hope so too. And
Yeah.
you are very much a leader and gifted in so many ways. And I think even just at the top of this conversation, I want to highlight that God ends up gifting us to serve alongside our husband, absolutely, but to do it together and to be able to leverage our own gifts to the church and to his kingdom and his glory. And so I think it's always fun to be able to highlight opportunities to where we have women that are definitely in the trenches alongside their husband and having to navigate a lot of what we're going to talk through here in a little bit, but God's also using you in ways to lead other women and to lead in opportunities in bringing people closer to the Lord and their Bibles and as they study and all of those things. And so if you are one of those that maybe feels a little bit hesitant of, well, am I a leader? I only do like 500 things for the church. Yes, you are a leader.
Yes.
And I think you can probably say something to this, but especially for ministers' wives and pastors' wives, oftentimes we end up being the ones that are being stretched or kind of stepping in and serving in different ways, whether gifted or not, sometimes just needed. So there is such a power and an influence in getting to serve alongside our husbands and serve the bride. And so I'm really excited about this conversation and a lot of kindred hopes and dreams and giftings in you, Christine. So let's start talking about it. So you are a big encourager of ministers' wives. And I know just coming out of these last couple of years, not just COVID, but the political scene, the racial tensions, all of those things, the statistics that are coming out at Barna are really kind of discouraging, just really putting a number to, I think it's 43% of pastors are wanting to step out of ministry right now. And the more conversations that I have with pastors' wives, I'm seeing it on their faces. I'm hearing it in their stories. So as you're kind of having conversations with pastors' wives, what are you hearing them really trying to like struggle and navigate through right now, coming out of such a hard season?
Yeah, I think I've said to my husband several times over the past few years, we are hearing about pastors and we're hearing about the struggle it's been for them, but who's talking about the pastors' wives?
Yep.
Because I know from my own experience that who carries the discouragement with the pastor is the pastor's wife. In fact, she probably carries it more because she loves her husband and wants him to be well and healthy, wants him to continue. You know, she wants him to be okay. And she's watching him up close with all the things he's carrying. And so I worry for ministry wives that there's going to come a later reckoning for them because they're holding it all together behind the scenes. I'm not saying that she's holding the church together behind the scenes. The pastors are working so hard and are weary and discouraged and questioning their calling, right? And I just am concerned that pastors' wives are going to kind of be the second wave.
Yeah.
And I'm hearing that from pastors' wives as I'm talking with them, and they come to me one-on-one and just say, I see two things. I see in them a heart. They love the Lord and they want to serve him and they want to do the right thing.
Yes.
They want to continue in what God has called them. And then on the other side, they are holding some private pain. It may be around what they're watching their husbands go through. It may be what people have said to them especially during this COVID thing, when so many decisions had to be made. And the ministry, it forces you to keep going. It forces you. There's always something else to do. There's always something to add to your plate. And so I think I'm hearing from pastors' wives that they haven't had space or maybe not known how to process the pain. And so now they're holding that and not quite sure what to do with it, but wanting to continue, wanting to have the right heart, wanting to do the right thing. So that combination. Yeah. So maybe just the private struggle that has all these things have compounded in the past few years for them.
Yeah. And I think what you're hitting on is something that frankly, I have experienced even just as a pastor's wife and as a leader, but then like consistently in these conversations that I'm having, to where the discouragement, and I think what's happening like emotionally with both her and her husband, and not knowing how to process that, not knowing how to grieve, not knowing how to be able to process disappointment and discouragement. And so what I'm seeing is almost kind of a frozenness of like, I don't know what to do. And in that, I think the enemy is just attacking them so much, to where they're still hearing kind of the fishbowl. You still need to be a certain way. You need us to lead us out of this. You need to meet an expectation or an image that they may have. So what are some of the ways that you're maybe trying to coach them or encourage them in healthy rhythms, like in how to process this disappointment, how to process, I think one of the things that I told another pastor's wife was how hard it is to just feel so disposable, that like coming out of this season, what you thought was a strong relationship or friendship, just one tweet or 2 months of not showing up. And then all of a sudden, like they're just gone and out of your life. And you're like, wait a second, so what are some healthy rhythms or even ways to kind of walk through some deep pain and emotion?
I'm so glad you asked that. I've gotten to speak to pastors' wives in the past few months, and I'm focusing on emotional health because you're right. I don't think we know how to deal with painful things. In the past, I just think the weight of the pain has gotten so big that it's forced us to have to deal with it, but we don't have the tools. Yeah. So in the past, it might be, someone left the church and then things are fine. We're not dealing with these grand, big issues like COVID and racial tension. And then it all has come to a head. And so what I'm talking to them about is what I learned through what I have been learning, which is emotional health. How can I be at a place where I know what I'm feeling, I can name what I'm feeling, I can acknowledge what I'm feeling, and then I know what to do with that feeling. I know what to do with the negative feeling of anger or jealousy or unforgiveness isn't a feeling, but it comes out of the bitterness. I would say that was a theme for me. Cynicism. What do I do with those things? And just really learning how God, first of all, He is an emotional being. He created us to be emotional, and He created all of the emotions that we have. And a lot of times we put them in categories. Well, this is positive. This is negative. I shouldn't feel these negative things. So I'm going to try to ignore them. When we ignore them, they get greater power in our lives. They come out at some point, often in very horrible ways, sinful ways, or whatever, overreaction. And so we have to learn how to first of all say these emotions are not bad. They can become sinful extremes. But if I'm feeling angry about something, there is a reason. And generally it's because we've been hurt. So we have to go back to acknowledging the hurt and learning how to take that to God and to name it to Him. And there's examples of this all over the Psalms where David is saying, I feel totally alone. I'm in this cave. I'm totally alone. There's a death threat against me. God, please do something. So we see him taking it to God and requesting something of Him and then trusting Him, waiting for Him to act. And I think that for pastors' wives, this takes space, first of all, that we give ourselves space to think about what we're thinking about and feeling, and then giving ourselves permission to say, I feel angry. That's scary to acknowledge. But then to take that to God and know He receives us in that. He wants us to go to Him in that and lament and ask for what we need and what we want. We can call upon His character, that He's just, that He sees what's unjust. If there's something that's been done against you that's unjust, He saw that. And He's a just God. And so we can ask Him to act according to His justness, right? So these are things I've been learning. It's what I'm talking about with pastors' wives. Just these has to be a regular practice, not just when we're in pain, but is there something good that's happening? Are we taking that to the Lord? Because what it does is it builds relational intimacy. That's how we build relational intimacy with our spouse or with a friend, is by sharing our what we're like. I think about mourn with those who mourn and rejoice with those who rejoice, sharing what we're mourning about, sharing what we're rejoicing about. When we get specific about that with God and with other people, there's a relational intimacy that grows.
Yeah, I agree. And I think what I'm seeing, and I always say, like, I ended up in counseling 2 years before COVID. And I am so grateful for the tools in emotional health. And my counselor used to say that your emotions are indicators, they're not enemies. And so, which growing up in a church that says, your heart is wicked and your emotions are wicked, like it was a shift in my perspective of what was happening. And so allowing myself to be angry, allowing myself to be hurt, and to be able to name the fear or the pain behind those emotions and those things. But anyway, so I think there's so much happening that what I see is, because women don't know how to handle those emotions or how to handle the hard things, what they end up doing is they end up walling up and saying, I will not be hurt anymore. Right. And that's where that bitterness and that anger and that even distance from the church. And so I think where I see that particularly with ministry wives is that's his ministry and my ministry is something else. And so it ends up becoming like a very separate mission for the family and for the marriage, and there's strain there. But then I also see, I think on the other side, to where women are trying, like they're naming what it is, they're naming the hard. But then I think because of the position that we're in, or the role, or whatever you want to call it, there's not that support or comfort, or like it really is an isolating thing, even when you're trying to choose health. I don't know. Would you agree?
Yes. And that's the complexity for the pastor's wife is for any woman. I would say you need to go to God and you need to talk to him about what you're feeling. And then you need community, and you need to tell them what you're feeling and experiencing, and process that with people who are trusted, safe people. For the pastor's wife, that can be complex. Right. Ministry, if we are not intentional, will drive us toward isolation. It will. And so we have to be very intentional about seeking out and cultivating relationships where they're trusted people, and that where we can be honest about what we're experiencing. Now, it may not be telling all the details of who it was that hurt you in the church or what exactly they did, but I think we can share those things even within our church body. I think not the details of what I just said is not what you share. What you can share is what you are experiencing. If you're feeling angry or you're feeling bitter, you can go to a friend, a trusted friend, and say, I am dealing with bitterness. This happened for me a few years ago. I just sat in church and I just thought, I don't want to be here anymore. I don't want to be here today. I don't want to be here next week. I'm not sure I want to come back because I do not love these people. And and it was nothing to do with these people. It was to do with me. And so I had to begin a process of dealing with the bitterness that had hardened my heart. And part of that process was going to friends in my church and saying, God has convicted me of bitterness. I didn't say this, but they didn't need to know all the reasons why that bitterness got there. But I have a problem. It's bitterness. And I need to confess that to you. I need to talk to you about it. I need truth from you. I need you to pray for me. And so I do think we have to be intentional about those relationships and depositing into relationships so that when we need that moment where we can go and say, if we're not cultivating a relationship ahead of time, we're not going to have those people when we need to say those things. And so I think always being intentional about cultivating trusted relationships with people. It doesn't have to be in your church. It could be another pastor's wife, but all of this takes intentionality. But for me, those kinds of relationships have been my sanity at times. It has saved me. And I don't, Jesus is my savior, but people have been important tools in my life that God has used to help me to grow. and to process pain.
Yeah, right. Well, and there's something that I want to point out that I think as you share shows your not only maturity, but your longing to ultimately follow Jesus. And so I remember I was addressing a group of pastors' wives and talking to them very transparently on like, I can give you all the verses on forgiveness or love one another, bear with one another, like long suffering, all of the one another's. And I think as a minister's wife and pastor's wife, like you have been so kind of ingrained in what the Bible says, but then we also take the posture of, but that's for everyone else, like I don't have to forgive because they don't know, like the drama that's gone on at church, or they don't know what was said about my husband, and we can start to rationalize the sin in our own hearts of, well, y'all need to get right with Jesus. And I'm going to sit over here and wait until y'all, get right kind of thing. And so what I appreciate about you sharing is that there has to be a fight for your own soul and sanctification, that that what God gives and what he says is for our good, everyone, pastor or not, right? And so to seek out community, to be intentional with our own sin and being able to say, I'm bitter and I've got a hard heart right now, and I'm jaded or cynical because of the pain that I'm in, but I'm choosing to not stay here. I'm choosing to not be defined or stuck in this sin cycle. And I think what I see a lot of times in my own heart, and as I'm having conversations, is that we have just gotten so laxed or walled. I mean, I think there's different experiences that different women have had, but that we are so content to dig our heels in the sand and say, not today, God, like maybe later, but this is where I'm going to be. Yeah. And he has so much more for us, so much more for us than sitting and being jaded and mad all the time.
Yes. I call this exceptional thinking, that I'm an exception to the rule. I'm an exception. And as I've been studying, as I went through that process with bitterness, I read a book called Overcoming Bitterness. And he talks about in that book that bitterness develops when we start to believe that we're the exception, that we're the exception to God's ways or the exception to God's commands. So like you said, forgiveness. Well, I'm an exception to that because no one else has to deal with this person the way that I do, or that we're an exception to his ways, that he uses suffering and he uses the sharpening of people in our lives to change us and grow us. That suffering doesn't have to lead to bitterness, or hard situations don't have to lead to bitterness. It can lead to a renewed hope or a refined faith. And so, but if I think I'm an exception, then a lot of dysfunction comes in.
Yeah.
And it walls us off. It keeps us from community. And I mean, I just think that's the greatest temptation for ministers' wives is the bitterness. Maybe I'm just speaking out of my own heart, but just the exception, that I'm the exception.
Yeah. And I think, as you point out, like it could just be you. I think the isolation piece is definitely there, because I think that is one of the top things that I'm consistently saying and that I'm hearing. And so mine may not be bitterness. Mine is, I think my root is like the abandonment and fear of abandonment because of own wounding that I've had in my own story. And so I think for each of us, it can kind of turn or be something different. But then it's also the lie of like, well, you can fight for the church or you can fight for community for everyone else, but you don't get that, because you're the pastor's wife. And so, I mean, the way that Satan tries to like slither his way in, with half truths and lies, is creative. He's crafty, obviously, in what he does. And so, however you listeners are maybe hearing that within your own story, within your own wounding, I think that intentionality of recognizing that as a lie and recognizing that as any way that he can try to make you quit the church or mad at the church or indifferent to the church is a win for him. And so knowing that you've got to fight that with the Lord and that he wants to renew and redeem those pain points and those woundings that we, I think, kind of entail.
Yeah, I would go back to what I was talking about with the emotional health. when we are specific with God about what we're feeling, I think even an illustration of when my husband compliments me, if he says something that's pretty general, like, you look nice today, I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
But if he says, I love that color on you, it's your color, then that means something a little different.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the same is true when we are honest with God about our specific feeling, that especially related to pain. He can get really specific with us in the truth too. Mm-hmm. Right? It becomes like this meaningful, memorable truth that really can bring us out of something we may think we're never going to be able to recover from. Yeah. So the specificity leads to the specific truth. That's what I like to think of in that. So we don't want to, you're addressing, and something that I've also been learning is that we can easily throw a scripture verse on. We know what we're supposed to think, what we're supposed to believe, but that often is a workaround, and it doesn't stick because we haven't acknowledged what we are feeling first, so that God can then layer on that truth of who he is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I agree completely. And it's hard work, but it's good work. And I know, Christine, we're going to talk about your book here in a little bit, but I think that there are just some really good practical tools to where if you're listening and you're like, okay, yeah, I got a lot of emotion, that I've been shoving, like, I don't know what to do. There's so many practical helps out there, I think, to get you to be able to kind of start taking those steps of recognizing, okay, where am I unhealthy? Where are some idols in my life? Where are some lies that I'm letting define me, that this is keeping me back from what God has for me? And then I think another big part is community, which, as we've said, like, there are so many layers. It's like an onion, right? Like, I mean, you can just peel out all of the intricacies and hard pieces and complexity of pastors' wives and friendship and relationship. So let's go kind of to maybe just some practical, because you talk about having people kind of come alongside you and not sharing completely everything that's going on. And in my brain, as a refute, I'm like, yeah, I tried that, and that really burned me. So I agree. And it's been true in my life. And I think it's Jackie Hill Perry that says that the thing that healed my church hurt was the church. And I think that is true for the leader or the member. So let's maybe kind of briefly talk through, what does that look like to gather around some trusted people to be that community that we all need?
Mm-hmm. How do we gather them? Or
like, what does it look like, I think, for our listeners, even just to kind of take those steps? So if they're sitting here listening to you talk about community and you're like, yep, great, I'm glad that works for you, but I've tried that 20 times and it hasn't worked out for me. So people just kind of a little encouragement on what do you look for? How do you find those people? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I would also remind everyone what I said earlier about exceptional thinking, that a lot of times we pastors' wives are the very worst at thinking, everyone can have friends except for me. And that's exceptional thinking. God has designed us for a community. And also, it's hard for everyone. Everyone gets burned. Everyone has their stuff said to somebody else. And so we're not the only ones who this is hard for. Do we have added complexity? Yes, because of the blurred lines of social, spiritual, there's a lot of overlap. So yes, there are complexities, but we don't want to give up on, because that means we lose the opportunity of having a gift. And so we have to be willing to take the risk over and over, even if we've been hurt, and we have. That's where the whole emotional health comes in. We can deal with that. But to disengage, scripture says that a fool is someone who stays isolated. And so I don't want to be a fool. I want to seek the gift that God is giving me. So the people that I look for are people, first of all, I take it slow. I'm brand new to a place. I don't know these people. I'm getting to know them, but I'm not letting everything out immediately, right? And letting them know everything about me, because I don't know if they're trustworthy. So that's what I'm looking for, is someone who I watch them, I observe how they interact with people. They're not gossiping to me about someone else. They are serving in the church. They're seeking to be a blessing to people. They are encouraging. They ask how they can pray for me. Like those are people who are seeking the Lord. And over time, as they prove trustworthy, then I'm going to share more with them. Now, I said that, and I would actually say it's backwards. There are times where we have to kind of take the risk of saying, I'm going to share this with you. And maybe it's something a little bit less. It's not the deepest thing you would want to share, but it's something that feels vulnerable to you. Taking that step, it's like dipping your toe in the water and seeing what happens. If that person goes there with you and they, sometimes I do that, Jackie, and I can tell by the look on their face that they do not know what to say. And they're a little bit mortified that their pastor's wife is sharing something a little more personal with them. Okay, that's fine. But they're not going to be, I've tested the water and I found out they can't go there with me. Right. But then what if someone does? Then I've taken the risk. They go there with me, and that's a building block. It's a deposit into a bank. Like I want to continue to deposit into that relationship because they are proving to be a good friend. Yeah. Now, I also have to consider myself and am I being a good friend? It's not just about what they do for me, but I think that's the main thing I look for is the trustworthiness. Yeah. Yeah. And I completely agree with everything that you're saying. And I think from my seat, what I have to continually tell myself, especially I think sometimes as a woman that is wired a little bit more like dominant, like type A, those kind of things. Like, believe it or not, I can be a much, like it can be a lot for someone. Some women don't know what to do with. Yeah. So there's that side. And then there's also the side of like, there is this perception that has been out there about pastors' wives. And so when you're sitting across the table from someone and you're sharing that you have struggles, like that could be the very first time that, oh my gosh, like she's just like me, which praise God, more people are seeing we're just like them, And so I think from our seat as well, being gracious with, they're not going to respond the way that we think they should respond. They're not going to understand some of the things that we're holding completely, and that's okay. But they still get to be parts of how God is going to balm wounds and how he's going to maybe even show us like, you know what, maybe it shouldn't have worked out the way I thought it should have. Like that's the beauty of the body. That's the beauty of being better together, is that sharpening of you're not like me and you're not in the same circumstances and you don't have the same perspective. And so I think another thing that has really helped me is testing the waters for sure and going slow. But then I think even from my own emotional health and just saying, she's not going to respond exactly how I think, and taking the step of communicating in vulnerability. This is what I need as a friend, as they have been tested and as they have been faithfully trying to walk alongside me. We cannot read each other's minds, And so I think a lot of times before I would get so upset, like, gosh, she didn't say anything, or like she didn't check in. And I'm expecting her to know all of the complexities of my day, or my emotional state in that moment, which Lord knows my counselor can't even do that. And I pay her, And so I think there's so much from our own internal processing of just being able to be gracious, to be vulnerable. And then also to know like these people are not perfect and we're not perfect and we wound and they wound. And it's the beauty of being able to lead together and walk together past that. But gosh, it's hard, isn't it? It's hard. It's so hard. It's so hard. But it's so worth it. I mean, I would say
Absolutely.
I lived in isolation for the first decade of being a pastor's wife. And I realized at some point, I have got to do this differently. I can't do this anymore by myself. And I started putting myself out there a little more. Vulnerability was one, initiating was another, even when I felt like I was always the one doing that.
Yeah, same.
And I got hurt. I have gotten hurt multiple times, but I also have developed deep friendships.
Yeah.
And so it's worth the risk. Yeah. That's the only way to get what we're looking for, is to take the risk.
Yeah. Amen. Preach. Am I allowed to say that? Preach. Yes. All right. believe it or not, I feel like we could do 2 more episodes. So we may have to like circle back and, hit all of the other topics, but let's kind of round out. And I would love for you to tell them about your book that just came out, and how they're able to connect with you, and maybe even glean some wisdom from all of the lessons that you have kind of walked through in these seasons of leadership and serving and those kind of things. So how do people connect with you? How do they learn from you?
Well, the book I just released last spring is called How to Thrive as a Pastor's Wife. And I tried to make it practical without being prescriptive, because I know every pastor's wife is different. We're all serving in different contexts. And so I really tried to keep in mind all kinds of women in all kinds of stages, but also to offer advice and tools and things that I have learned along the way, including from my mistakes. So it's in there, How to Thrive as a Pastor's Wife. You can find it wherever books are sold, but I have a website dedicated to all my resources for pastors' wives, and it's called howtothriveasapastorswife.com. You can find out about the book and my podcast, which is called Ministry Wives Podcast. Jackie's been a guest on my podcast, along with other incredible women.
Yeah.
And just all kinds of things on there. There's resources, articles, downloadable things, all on that website.
You shepherd people really well. And I think one of the things that I really appreciate about you is that your book is like, I don't know, maybe this is not something I should say or be recorded, but there's been so many pastors' wives books where I'm like, that is not me, like that's not helpful. That's not practical. And your book is very much practical and helpful in so many different areas, and speaking to the things where I'm like, thank you for saying that, And so if you are a minister's wife, you definitely need to get a copy of that book, as well as what I love about the podcast is that you are very intentional about getting a diverse group of women that you are interviewing and gaining wisdom from. And so it's not the same race, it's not the same ethnicity, not serving in the same context. You have rural, you have city, you have suburbs. I mean, like the way that you are being intentional to get wisdom to women all across the planet is seen. And I appreciate it so much, because I think, again, it goes back to that lie of like, well, nobody understands, or, she doesn't have it like I do. And so I think you do a really great job of just having a big tent, having a big span, and saying, yeah, we're all in this together. And it looks very different, but we're definitely all in this together. So thanks, I appreciate you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Coming from you, that's a huge compliment.
All right, guys. Well, we are out of time, and probably going to have a couple follow-up episodes, because I feel like we could talk all day long, and just there's so much wisdom, Christine, from you. And so I appreciate you and all of the time and grace and encouragement that you've given today at the table.
Thanks for having me.
And as always, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of At the Table. And we hope to see you next week for another episode. See you then.